Hello, welcome to Web of Stories. My name is Melinda. I am here with my weekly wrap up. I have sort of missed the window when the kids are upstairs. They're in the next room over. This may be a noisy video. I would go outside and film, like lots of times during the summer I go in my backyard and film, but they're building a new neighborhood across the street from me, like behind our neighbors across the street. So it's really noisy outside. Not only that, the big one could hit and I wouldn't even know, because of all the shaking that our house is going through because of that. You didn't need to know that, but just so you know, that's why I'm not filming outside. And that's why I'm here. Anyway, I hope you all had a good week. I had a busy week. It sort of got really busy on Wednesday when I had an appointment, my kids had an art class, we had family eye doctor's appointments and on my Google Calendar. And there were a couple times where, like, when you confirm an appointment, it puts it back on your calendar, so it's there twice. I also had another meeting. I had 10 appointments. It was like, But anyway, I made it through. And I actually finished some things, as I told you I would. I told you I barely had anything last week, but I do have more this week. Mostly because some of the longer stuff that I had, I was working on, so I finished. It's also the end of the month, with the exception of my DNF, which is what I'm going to start with. Everything I finished in July, because this is August 1st. So you'll see that. I just need to, you'll probably see me do my monthly wrap up in the same shirt, which, by the way, shirt check. Easily distracted by cats, books, and coffee. Ain't that the truth? My cat, you'll also hear her. She's going to start making noise because she's going to be chowing down over there. She's just loud, like the rest of my family. Anyway, everything other than my DNF, which technically I like last read it last night, but I just decided to DNF this morning. So even technically that, although just because the way my spreadsheet works out, it's going to show up in August. Everything was in July. So, because it's August 1st. But anyway, so let me start with my DNF. My DNF was this book, Manhattan Beach by Jennifer Egan. This was recommended to me a long time ago through Book Riot's My TBR service. And someone, I think it was Sue Jackson, asked me what the My TBR service was. And because I am so far behind in comments, and I am sorry, I'm gonna take this bookmark out because I'm done reading it. I didn't get an answer. So Book Riot has a service called My TBR, and you can sign up for it, and quarterly, although I guess you can still order in, like, drop-in recommendations, but quarterly you get like 3 recommendations. You fill out this survey saying what you like and you don't like, or deal breakers, that sorts of things, and what you're looking for. And you can always go back and change it. Like if you all of a sudden want a different kind of book or whatever, you can always go back and change it. But I have been part of it since the beginning. And one of my first recommendations was this book, and I just now got to it. I have the book here, holding it in my hands. I actually listened to it. That didn't make a difference as to why I DNF'd it, though. And it's not a bad book. This is historical fiction. It's set during World War II in New York, and the main character is a young woman named Anna Kerrigan, whose father had disappeared and she doesn't know why. There's also this gangster involved. It's well written. It's a fine book. I just kind of felt like I'd already read it. Like, it was similar enough to a lot of other books that I've read that I just didn't feel like I was getting anything new out of it. And so I decided I wasn't going to continue with it, which is my prerogative, and I get to do that. And I am working on being better at DNFing. So yeah, I got this from the library book sale. So I have to figure out how to get this off. Yeah, I'm going to have to blow dry it or something so that I can sell it for used in my church used book sale that I'm running. See, I paid $4 for it. I'm going to sell it for $1. So I gotta get this off here so there's no confusion. Anyway, so I DNF'd this. Again, not a bad book, just I felt like I had already read it. So let me get to what I finished. I have finished 5 books in the past week, and the first one I'm very late to the game on. If you follow me on Instagram or Facebook, I've already talked about this there. I'm very, very late to it, but that was intentional. When it comes to books and hype, if I know a book comes out, I know it's going to be hyped. I either have to read it right when it comes out, or I have to wait a couple years. An example was James. I knew James was going to be highly hyped, so I got a copy of it right away and read it. So I felt like I could read it before the hype really got going. This book, I missed that window, so I had to wait a couple years, like 3. And this book is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. This is a retelling of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. It's set in Appalachian, Virginia in the 90s, 2000s. I really enjoyed it. It was worth the wait. It was completely worth the wait, and I am very glad I waited, because I don't think I would have... I think I would have always been questioning, do I like it because of the hype had I read it earlier than this? So I'm really glad that I waited to read it. This particular copy, Bookish Best Friend thought this might be a tie-in cover, because they are apparently turning this into a limited series on one of the streaming platforms. No, this is the British paperback copy, because when I bought this years ago, a long time ago, at least 2 years ago, I could pay $35 for a hardcover in the US or $11 for a paperback from Blackwell's. So I went that route. And I quite like it. I like this cover better than sort of the US cover. That all being said, this is not the copy I read. I ended up listening to this. Sue Jackson, and I think Bookish Best Friend too, really recommended the audio. So I decided to go for audio on this, because that was the way I was going to be able to fit it in this summer. I did want to read it this summer because it is a big book, and it's big book summer. So I decided to do the audio. I am so glad that I did. It is such an excellent audio. I've talked about my audio listening before, but lately I have been listening to audiobooks kind of the end of the day when my eyes are really tired. It has become a substitute for watching TV, which I wasn't even doing before then because I don't feel like watching TV. But anyway, but usually it's like, yeah, I'll just kind of listen to an audiobook and, you know, do my little iPad coloring game while I do it, because that's enough brain activity where I can still focus entirely on the book, but it just works out well. This one, I was like, I can't wait to get back to Demon Copperhead. I can't wait to get back to Demon Copperhead. So excellent audiobook. Really a really hard book to read at times. I cannot stress that one enough. It is very hard. It's a very unflinching look at the opioid crisis anywhere in America, but especially in the Appalachian area. Really good. Really highly recommend it. If you haven't read it yet, 3 years, people have been telling you to read this book. Read the book, okay? It's been 3 years. The hype is gone now. You can read it if you're like me. So there's that. The second book I read is actually this one. I had 2 buddy reads, and I finished them on the same day. And this one, I am so thankful. I'm thankful we did both of them as buddy reads, but for different reasons. This one, I am so thankful we did as a buddy read, because there's no way I could have read it had it not been a buddy read. And that is A Canticle for Liebowitz by Walter M. Miller Jr. And I read this with Becca at Read Becca. This is foundational science fiction. I am not a science fiction reader. I'm not saying I don't, it's not my preferred genre at all. And Becca is a science fiction reader, so she could hold my hand through this book. We also, did a schedule of 2 chapters a day, which made it easier for me to get through. You're basically dealing with 3 connected novellas. So the first one is set, do they give us a year? It's 600 years past the 1950s. So 25 something, I don't know, do the math. And we're at this sort of monastery in the Southwest. It definitely felt like the Southwest. I felt like I was in Arizona. The world as we know is not a thing anymore. Something has happened. It's pretty clear that there was a nuclear war. There's several reasons why it's clear it's a nuclear war. And then after the nuclear war, there was something called the purification or the simplification, where basically they kind of got rid of a lot of knowledge as kind of a way of keeping people in check. What do you know about that? So this first story, 500 years after the war supposedly took place in this book came out in 1959. So let's say 1959, 600 years past that. And there is a novitiate, is that the right term? Novice, to this abbey in the Southwest, which is the sect of, it's a Cistercian or Benedictine, doesn't really matter. But their patron saint is Saint Liebowitz. And St. Liebowitz was basically a guy from 1959 whose writings they found. They have a story kind of about him, but you're never really sure how much of that is true. And the writings, of course, are things that are not that important, but they have put a lot of importance on them. So the first story, you meet Brother Francis, who is this novice, and he kind of comes across this shelter that has memorabilia from St. Liebowitz. What it is a fallout shelter. And there's stuff in it. And it's something that he finds is the thing they need to canonize Liebowitz. And so we get into this world. And there's a lot of humor in this book. This book becomes less funny as you go along. And Rome, as we know it, Vatican Rome is not there. There's a new Rome, the Vatican, which I thought was Texarkana, but Texarkana is like something else. I don't know. New Rome is somewhere around there. But anyway, he has to go and make sure that they canonize St. Liebowitz. The second novella-ish is set about 600 years after that. And this is where something, a difference in the way I read it and the way that Becca read it became really clear. There's a lot of historical influence in that. It feels, Becca said it felt like a Western, and I definitely see that, but to me it also felt very medieval. And it became clear for us reading, and Becca's the one who made this observation, that she was coming to this book as a science fiction reader. And a science fiction reader, you go into this like the whole world is new. You know, the world is being created. You can only trust what's in that world. She'll explain that better than I can. Whereas I was going into it as a history/historical fiction reader, and I am trying to tie everything to history. So in this second story, we're getting a real debate about knowledge and gatekeeping knowledge, which has started a little bit in the first one, but it's more developed in the second story. Then you get to the third one. I'm not going to get too much into the third one because I do think that'll be a little spoilery, but it is a very, very, I thought, very hard one to read because of what happens in it. Not hard, like difficult. Actually, as far as like reading ease for me, someone who's not a science fiction reader reading science fiction, I actually thought the last section was the easiest to kind of read and understand. But content-wise, it's very hard. Ultimately, I came out of this book, I don't want to say this is a bad book. I'm not saying the book, I had a negative feeling about the book. I felt like the message of the book had a very pessimistic feeling. That's what I felt. Whereas Becca thought it had a very optimistic feeling. And both our viewpoints are valid. And I think that it's a difference of readers, and we had great conversations about it. So yeah, I do feel like I missed a lot in this book because I'm not a science fiction reader. Probably would get a lot from a reread. I'm not planning on rereading it, honestly, but I could get a lot more from a reread. And it's interesting because Bookish Best Friend recently read this book for a book club that she's in that's science fiction, fantasy, and fantasy book group. I mean, it's that. And it was sort of a universally disliked book. And then other people have told me they've loved this book. So I went to Becca, I said, I don't know what to think of this book, but let's give it a try. And so I am definitely in the I don't know what to think of it book. And I think that Becca is much more of a positive view on it. But so many thanks to Becca, because I would not have been able to make it through this book without her. We had some great conversations. If nothing else, this is a thought-provoking book, and it would be excellent for a book club, although maybe not the one Bookish Best Friend was in, a book club or a class or something like that. So Canticle, Liebowitz, for Liebowitz. Okay, the second book that I did a buddy read on. I have not yet cleared my tabs out of this one, so you're going to see all my tabs. And it's going to tell you a lot about this. But I buddy read this with Patrice at 2 Minutes on Books. We have been reading some history books together. And this is Never Caught, the Washington's Relentless Pursuit of Their Runaway Slave on a Judge. There are my tabs. And these empty spots at the beginning and the end, this is sort of there's not much at the beginning, but the end, this is like your bibliography, things like that. I knew about this story because when my daughter was in elementary school and still at a private school she was attending at the time, she did a book report on the young reader's version of this book. And there was some consternation about that, not with her, not with me, with some people at the school. And I know why. And I do think it's important. So this is my thing. You need to, if you're going to read this book, which I highly recommend, this is a great book, can't you tell? You cannot be the sort of person who cannot handle your heroes being examined and possibly questioned or criticized, okay? The Washingtons, well, George Washington, who is the father of our country and such a noble man and blah, 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 does not come off well in this book. And his wife comes off even worse. That was what the problem was when my daughter read a book. They're like, yeah, it's kind of hard. It's about George Washington. We don't teach that. Well, I am a firm believer that you need to look with clear eyes, and there are, you cannot just ignore the bad about people. So I didn't have a problem with it, but I can see why people would have a problem with it. And if you cannot put your idolization of George Washington to the side, this is not a book for you. But anyway, I think what's important going into this book is everything that we really know about Ona Judge, from her own words, are from 2 interviews that she gave later in her life. So, there weren't a lot known about enslaved people at the time because society didn't see them as people. However, there is a lot recorded and known about the Washingtons. A lot. I mean, they were observed, they were reported on. Their writings exist, their own writings, so their own thoughts. So between the interviews we have with Ona Judge and everything we know about the Washingtons, Erica Armstrong Dunbar was able to put together a really good picture. So Ona Judge was born on Mount Vernon. She was born enslaved. She was mulatto. Her father was a white indentured servant. She, at one point, I think it's in the interviews, like the people who interviewed her made the comment that she could pass as white. Not that that's really important. I'm just kind of setting the scene on this. There is one part where anyway, I'll get to that. But so she belonged to this, there's basically at Mount Vernon, there were 2 groups of slaves. There were the slaves that were owned by George Washington. And then there were what were called the dower slaves. And these slaves were part of the estate from Martha Washington's first husband. So George Washington didn't actually own these slaves. Personally, I am not entirely clear if Martha Washington owned them either or if they were part of the estate. I kind of think that she didn't, but when she would pass and it would go on to her heirs, they would own her. I think that's how that worked. But anyway, she was a personal maid to Martha Washington. And when the Washingtons went to New York and then to Philadelphia, so George Washington could be president, they took a handful of slaves with them, and Ona Judge was one of them. And again, we don't know Ona Judge's thinking at this point. We can only surmise. And if there is a complaint about this book, which even this is a tempered complaint, there is quite a bit of conjecture in this book, like Ona felt. Well, how did you know Ona felt that way? I think it really helps the reading experience. But if you're someone who, and I do get this, someone who doesn't want that in your history books, you want then just know that that's there. That could be a drawback for you. So there's a lot of discussion in this book on what kind of enslaver George Washington actually was. Was he a good one? Everyone thought he was good, but was he really? All this. But anyway, it comes to the point where one of the Washington grandchildren, Eliza Custis, is going to get married. Now, Eliza is I actually should show you the picture of Eliza, because this tells you a lot that you need to know about Eliza. She was, that's chapter 6. I think it's chapter 7. No, it's not. That's chapter 8. Okay, sorry. Well, I'm going to try and talk while I do this. Oh, there it is. This is Elizabeth Betsy Curtis. Just look at the body language on her. She was a difficult girl. Everyone knew she was a difficult girl, and she had decided she was going to marry this guy that the Washingtons didn't think was appropriate. There was a lot of family drama about this. But among all this was Martha Washington's probably well-founded belief that Betsy, Elizabeth, whatever, they call her different things, was not very mature. and didn't know anything about being a married woman or running a household. So Martha Washington decided that she was going to gift Ona Judge, which apparently she could do as part of this dower thing, to her granddaughter as a wedding gift. She didn't bother to tell Ona Judge this other than just sort of in passing. Now, Ona Judge knew enough about this granddaughter that A, she didn't want to go work for her. She also knew that that would mean leaving Mount Vernon, where her family was. She wanted to leave Mount Vernon. She wanted to leave her family, I should say. So, and she's in Philadelphia at the time, where she has had a fair amount of interaction with the free black population. There's talk in here about how they tried to keep those two, the enslaved population and the free black population, separate, but how are you going to do that? Especially when the majority of the citizens of the free black population are professionally doing the same sort of work that the enslaved people are doing. So of course they're going to cross paths. Anyway, she's like, no way, not doing this. So she runs away. And so she runs away. She ends up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The Washingtons, this is this really weird part that I feel like George Washington is convinced, and I think this says a lot about him, is convinced that she would never run away on her own. So there must be a French boyfriend involved. It's like, what? So a little bit of their searches are kind of like misdirected because they're looking for this French boyfriend who doesn't exist. At one point, they get someone. He contacts George Washington, makes contact with someone in New Hampshire who gets someone else to go get Ona. And Ona's like, he goes, and he's like not really into this. So up in New Hampshire, the view on slavery is very different. And in this town in New Hampshire, it's really very different. So the guy's kind of like, oh, George Washington's telling me how to go do this. So he goes and he's like tries to negotiate with her to go back to slavery. Like, that's going to work. She figures out what's going on. So she just kind of says what he wants to say. And then on the date that he says, okay, just come to the harbor at this point. I'll take you back to Alexandria. So you go to George Washington. Okay. Well, of course, the date comes and she doesn't go because... And there's this very interesting comment, like, he's actually, yeah, he understands that. Like, well, too bad. So he keeps trying to get out of doing this job with George Washington. And so that whole effort goes awry. There's another effort where George Washington's, I want to say his like great nephew, he sends his great nephew or something up to New Hampshire to get her. And he's working in cahoots with a man named Robert Langdon. Is that his name? Robert Langdon? Langdon is the last name. He was a senator, and he had been a Federalist, but he had kind of turned the page and became a Democratic Republican. Go watch Hamilton to get all that. But while he had slaves, and actually I forgot, one of the reasons they knew he was in Portsmouth, that Ona Judge was in Portsmouth, is that the Langdon family and the Washingtons had been close, and Langdon's daughter had been a friend of not Elizabeth Custis, but another one of the Washington grandchildren that George and Martha were raising, and knew her as a child, and they had crossed paths in Portsmouth. But anyway, so sends the nephew up to go work with Langdon, who's like not into this, to go capture the slave. And the guy goes and the nephew tries to convince Ona Judge to just, hey, why don't you come back down there? Like, this isn't going to work. The fact that they don't realize why this isn't going to work says so much. And then he goes back and reports to Langdon that he doesn't think that Ona Judge is going to come on her own, so he's going to take her by force. Ona Judge at this time is married and has a child. And this is really interesting. At this point, Langdon somehow sends a message to Ona Judge saying, this guy is going to come get you. You need to leave. So she flees, and that's how she's able to maintain her freedom. She's never completely free because of the Fugitive Slave Acts. There were several. She could have been recaptured at any time, as well as her 3 children. But she never was. So that's the story of Ona Judge. And she does go into it. She says some interesting things about the Washingtons. They were not very Christian, according to her. One of the she believed great blessings of taking her own freedom was that she was able to become a Christian. She learned about Christianity, learned about Jesus, and all this. And this comes up in her interviews. And then she says that the Washingtons weren't really Christian. They weren't very religious, which was very, quite not what people were expecting to hear. So if you read this book, which I do hope you do, because it's a book that's great for people who don't read history, because it does read like a novel in a lot of ways. Part of that's because of the conjecture, but it's also a great story. Be sure to read the epilogue. The epilogue is not actually about Ona Judge. It is about her sister, Philadelphia. Yes, her sister's name was Philadelphia, because Philadelphia ended up having to take the position with the Washington's granddaughter that Ona was supposed to have. And she and her husband have quite the interesting life. And both Patrice and I were, why isn't this a movie? And like Never Caught, but also Philadelphia's story. These are fantastic stories. It's amazing. I do know why it's not a movie. It's because generally any criticism towards, I think that we can kind of criticize Thomas Jefferson at this point. His relationship with Sally Hemings is pretty well known. But you don't criticize George Washington. I honestly think that's why this has not been adapted or made into a movie or a show or anything, because the Washingtons do not come off well in this. But anyway, loved this book. Definitely. I need to go through and do my annotations so I can get all these tabs off it. Really, really enjoyed that. Oh, this is going to be a long one. Okay. After that, I finished an audiobook. I started this right after Demon Copperhead, so I needed something completely different than Demon Copperhead. And so I decided, instead of reading something literary or something hard, I would read Sasquatch horror. I read Devolution. Oh, I got to get the whole title here. I can get the whole title? Sorry, I have this on my screen. So Devolution, the first-hand account of the Rainier Sasquatch Massacre by Max Brooks. Max Brooks wrote World War Z. I did this on audio, full cast. The cast includes like Nathan Fillion. Who else was in it? Names that I knew. There was a couple other names that I knew really well. I want to say Jeff Daniels. Is that right? Who's in it? There were names that I knew, including like Terry Gross and some other NPR guy who played themselves, which I thought was hilarious. But anyway, and it's also a book that's really made to be audio because there's radio interviews in it. And it's reading a diary. It's a book that's meant for audio. The way this happens is Mount Rainier erupts. Mount Rainier, if you don't know where it is, it's the Seattle area. That's like the mountain closest to Seattle. It erupts, and that causes quite a bit of devastation because it's not far at all from some majorly populated areas of Seattle, Tacoma, Olympia, whatever. There's this little community that's up in the forest in this area, and it's sort of like an eco community, like a smart eco community. It's a planned one. There's like, I don't know, 6 or 7 houses, like all living there together. They're within driving distance of, say, Seattle. And the eruption actually doesn't affect them. It does affect the roads out. So they are stuck there. And that's fine. There's like this one woman there who's like, oh, we have to like get our, plan for all these emergencies. And in the narrator, it's her diary. It's like, okay, whatever. So we get the diary entries and all of a sudden things start happening and they start hearing things. Basically what it is killer Sasquatches. It's totally ridiculous, but it's fun. It's killer Sasquatches. It is very gory in places. I will say, if you are not good with body horror, this is not for you. But you know what? It was what I needed after Demon Copperhead. It was entertaining. You cannot think too hard about this book. Like, you need to go into it as brain candy and it'll be fine. It's not super scary. It's definitely gorier than scarier. I think it's not like spooky at all. It's not the kind of horror that I find typically scary. It is very suspenseful though. But for what it was, I really enjoyed it. Okay, so the final book I finished, this is one that I've had on my Kindle for ages. I'm kind of slowly going through some old stuff on my Kindle, and I will do a full talk about this in a Books of the Spirit episode, because this is a spiritual book. But I think there's enough to to just sort of talk about it a little bit here. And this is Grace Eventually, Thoughts on Faith by Anne Lamott. So Anne Lamott is a writer. I think she's most widely known for the book Bird by Bird, lessons on writing or something like that. I know that I had that assigned to me in school for writing. And Anne Lamott was kind of a messed up person. She had gotten sober. This is the second actual book of hers I read because I didn't read Bird by Bird. The first one I had read, I can't remember the exact title of it, but a friend of mine recommended to me when I was pregnant the first time because it's about Anne Lamott, who became a single mother and all this. She had been dealing with drug and alcohol addiction and just sort of a messed up person. This is later. I mean, in the book, her son's a teenager. And these are essays about faith. I won't go too far into it other than to say one thing I do like about this book is Anne Lamott is very self-aware and self-deprecating, and she knows she's a mess. It does not fall into the hero of your own story trap. So there's that. But one thing I found and the writing is fantastic. Fantastic. It is just entertaining writing. I don't think it is spiritual in a way that people who are not spiritual won't get stuff out of it. I think anyone could read this book. But the point that kind of got me about this book is it was published in 2007. And a lot of this book is Anne Lamott dealing with her disappointment in, her stress because, all of that around the George W. Bush administration. Understandable. Personally, I mean, I was old enough to remember it. I voted in it. You know, I was an adult during that time. But I'm also an adult now. And so every time she talked about how the world is ending, I'm like, oh, honey, you have no clue what's in store for you. None whatsoever. These are going to be halcyon days. I mean, that's probably going a bit too far. But, I mean, I do remember the Bush administration. And I remember some of the stuff going on in the Bush administration. I'm not saying it was easy, but comparatively. So that was sort of an interesting little, Now, she does say things in the conversation of all this that I felt were kind of useful for dealing with our current situation on how to look at things and how to find your peace, that sort of stuff. But yeah, I kind of had to laugh a little bit when she is talking about how absolutely horrible things are right then. And I'm like, oh, you sweet, sweet child. Anyway, that was my reading this week. I've talked for over half an hour. Apparently my reading was good. I am going to be filming my monthly wrap up, which will be out on Tuesday. I have to fill my sheet up so I can talk about it. And then I will do that here. I'll film it today. And so I'll be wearing the same shirt. The fly that lives in my house has not made an appearance during this video, so that's a win. Anyway, so let me know how your week was. If you have thoughts on anything that I've read, let me know. Yeah. That's it. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Like, subscribe, join my Discord, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.